My name is Elliot Cross, and I was 24 years old when a single misplaced letter rewrote the trajectory of my life. I'd spent the previous 6 months in a fog of applications, recommendation letters, and sleepless nights fueled by instant coffee and desperation. My goal was singular, almost obsessive, to secure a position in the rare manuscripts restoration program at Ashford Institute, a centuries-old academy nestled in the fog-soaked moors of northern England. Ashford wasn't just prestigious, it was mythical. A place where scholars wore their eccentricities like badges of honor, where medieval texts were treated with more reverence than human comfort, and where the scent of aging vellum was said to seep into your very bones. I had dreamed of Ashford since childhood, ever since my grandmother, a retired librarian with ink-stained fingers and stories that felt like spells, had shown me an illuminated manuscript from the 14th century. The gold leaf had shimmered under the lamplight, and I had understood, even then, that some things in this world were worth preserving at any cost. So when the acceptance letter arrived, I didn't just open it. I stared at the envelope for 10 full minutes, afraid that breaking the seal might shatter the dream. When I finally tore it open, the words blurred with tears. I hadn't realized I was crying. "Dear Ms. Cross, we are pleased to offer you admission." I read the sentence 3 times before the wrongness registered. Ms. Cross. Not Mr. Cross. MS. My stomach twisted. I scanned the letter frantically, searching for other errors, but everything else was correct: my address, my application ID, even the specific research proposal I had submitted on 13th century bindery techniques. Everything except my gender. I laughed. A sharp, bitter sound that echoed in my tiny apartment. Surely this was a typo. A simple clerical mistake that could be fixed with a single email. I fired off a message immediately, polite but firm, explaining the error. Then I waited. 3 days passed. Then a week. Finally, a response arrived, not from admissions, but from the Institute's registrar, a woman named Dr. Pemberton, whose reputation for bureaucratic severity was legendary even among applicants. Dear Ms. Cross, our records indicate your enrollment documents were submitted under the name Elliot A. Cross, female. All supporting materials, including your passport scan and insurance forms, reflect this designation. Ashford Institute does not permit alterations to official records after the matriculation deadline, June 15th. You are expected to report for orientation on September 1st as listed. Failure to comply will result in forfeiture of your position. I read the email 7 times, each reading tightening the vice around my chest. Passport scan? And then, with sickening clarity, I remembered. Finals week. I'd been drowning under the weight of my undergraduate thesis, 2 part-time jobs, and the Ashford application, a monster of a submission requiring 17 different documents, 3 essays, and portfolio scans of previous restoration work. I'd been standing in my university's student center, staring at the photocopy machine like it was an enemy I couldn't defeat, when a voice had cut through my spiral. You look like you're about to have a breakdown. I'd turned to find Sienna Holt leaning against the wall, arms crossed, a smirk playing at the corner of her mouth. Sienna was the kind of person who moved through the world with unsettling ease, sharp-eyed, quick-witted, and just chaotic enough to be dangerous. We'd shared a Gothic literature seminar the previous semester, and she'd spent most of it arguing with the professor while I'd hidden in the back row, taking meticulous notes. "I'm fine," I'd lied, fumbling with my documents. "You're the opposite of fine." She'd pushed off the wall, sauntering closer. "Let me guess, graduate application?" I nodded, too exhausted to deflect. "Ashford?" Her eyes had lit up with something I couldn't quite name. "God, you're brave. That place eats people alive." "Thanks for the encouragement," I'd muttered. She'd studied me for a moment, then made a decision. "Give me your stuff. I'll scan everything, organize it, and submit it for you. You look like you haven't slept in 3 days." "I can't ask you to." "You're not asking. I'm offering." She'd held out her hand, expectant. "Besides, you helped me pass the medieval lit. Consider this payback." I hesitated. But Sienna's confidence was magnetic, and I was drowning. so I'd handed her everything, my passport, my transcripts, my personal statement, and stumbled back to my apartment to collapse into 12 hours of dreamless sleep. I never checked the submission. I trusted her completely. Now, standing in my apartment with Dr. Pemberton's email glowing on my screen, I felt the betrayal like a physical blow. Sienna had done this deliberately. She'd changed my application, altered my documents, and submitted me as Elliot A. Cross, female. But why? I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking, and scrolled through my contacts until I found her number. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. Sienna, I hissed into the silence. I know what you did. Call me back. No. She didn't. Orientation at Ashford Institute was scheduled for September 1st, and despite my fury, despite my terror, I boarded the plane to England. Because the alternative, losing this opportunity, this dream, was unthinkable. The institute rose from the moors like something out of a nightmare, all Gothic spires and fog-shrouded courtyards. Inside, the hall smelled of old paper, wood polish, and damp stone. It was exactly as I'd imagined, and yet I couldn't enjoy a single moment of it. Because I was expected to arrive as Elliot Cross, female. And I had no idea what that meant. The first shock came during check-in. A stern-faced administrator with silver hair pulled into a brutal bun handed me a thick envelope. Your residency assignment and dress code materials, Ms. Cross. All students in the restoration program are required to adhere to institute standards during working hours. Dormitories are separated by gender. You've been assigned to Ashcroft Hall, 3rd floor, room 12. I opened my mouth to object, but she was already waving the next student forward. Inside the envelope, I found a key, a map, and a single-page document titled Institute Dress Code, Female Students. My vision blurred as I read. Professional attire required at all times within academic buildings. Permitted garments include knee-length skirts or dresses, blouses with modest necklines, closed-toe shoes with heels no higher than 2 inches. Hair must be kept neat and styled appropriately. Jewelry should be minimal and tasteful. My hands began to shake. This wasn't just a clerical error. This was a cage. I stood frozen in the dormitory hallway, the envelope trembling in my hands, staring at the door marked room 12. Behind me, the sounds of orientation chaos echoed, laughter, hurried footsteps, the rolling of suitcases over ancient floorboards. Around me, other students in the restoration program moved with the easy confidence of people who belonged. Women in tasteful blouses and pencil skirts. Men in pressed shirts and wool trousers. Everyone fits seamlessly into Ashford's rigid mold. Everyone except me. I pressed my forehead against the cool wood of the door, fighting the urge to turn around, walk straight back to the airport, and disappear. But the thought of my grandmother's face, the pride that had shone in her eyes when I'd told her about my acceptance, anchored me in place. Just get through orientation, I told myself. Tomorrow, you'll find someone in administration who can fix this. I unlocked the door. The room was small but elegant, tall windows overlooking the moors, a narrow bed with crisp white linens, an antique writing desk, and a wardrobe that looked like it had survived 2 world wars. My suitcase sat waiting at the foot of the bed, delivered ahead of my arrival. And on the bed, laid out with deliberate precision, was a uniform. Not the uniform. A uniform. A charcoal gray skirt, pleated and conservative, ending just below the knee. A cream-colored blouse with pearl buttons and a subtle collar. A burgundy cardigan, soft and fitted. Black tights, still in their packaging. And a pair of simple black loafers with a modest heel. Pinned to the blouse was a note, typed on official Ashford letterhead. All first-year students must wear institute-approved attire during the welcome ceremony this evening at 1800 hours in the Great Hall. This is non-negotiable. Failure to comply will result in disciplinary review. My stomach dropped. I picked up the skirt, holding it at arm's length like it might bite. The fabric was heavy, expensive, undeniably real. This wasn't a mistake someone could laugh off. This wasn't a costume party. This was my life now, at least for the next few hours. Just tonight, I told myself. Survive tonight. Tomorrow, you fix everything. The bathroom at the end of the hall was mercifully empty. I locked myself in a stall and stared at the uniform draped over the door hook, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. I'd never worn anything like this. Not even as a joke. Not even on Halloween when friends had tried to coax me into drag for laughs. I'd always deflected, laughed it off, stayed safely in my jeans and hoodies. Now I had no choice. I started with the tights, pulling them from the package with shaking hands. The nylon felt alien against my fingers, too thin, too delicate. I sat on the closed toilet lid and bunched one leg up, the way I'd seen women do in movies, then slid my foot inside. The sensation was immediate and deeply unsettling. The fabric clung to my skin like a second layer, smooth and cool, highlighting every contour of my calf and thigh. I pulled the other leg on, then stood, adjusting the waistband. My legs looked different. Longer, somehow. Sleeker. I didn't let myself think about it. The blouse came next. I fumbled with the buttons, they were on the wrong side, my fingers clumsy and confused. It took 3 attempts before I managed to fasten them all. The fabric was soft, almost silky, and it fit closer than I expected, hugging my chest and shoulders in a way that made me acutely aware of my body. Then the skirt. I stepped into it, pulled it up over my hips, and fastened the side zipper. The weight of it settled around my waist, the pleats falling in neat lines down to my knees. When I moved, it swayed. The cardigan slipped on easily, its sleeves ending just past my wrists. I buttoned it halfway, the way the illustration on the note had shown. Finally, the shoes. I slid my feet into the loafers, and even though the heel was modest, barely an inch, it changed everything. My posture shifted. My weight redistributed. I felt taller and yet somehow more precarious. I stepped out of the stall and faced the mirror. And froze. The person staring back at me was a stranger. From the neck down, I looked like every other woman I'd passed in the hallways, neat, professional, composed. The uniform erased the androgyny I'd always carried, the comfortable ambiguity of loose t-shirts and worn jeans. In its place was someone undeniably coded as female. But my face ruined the illusion. My jaw was too square. My brow is too heavy. My hair, brown, shaggy, and desperately in need of a cut, hung limply around my ears. And the faint shadow of stubble darkened my chin, visible even in the bathroom's dim light. I looked like a man wearing women's clothing. Badly. Panic clawed at my chest. I couldn't go out like this. I couldn't. The bathroom door swung open. I jerked backward, instinctively trying to hide, but there was nowhere to go. A young woman stepped inside, petite, with dark skin and hair braided into an intricate crown. She froze when she saw me, her eyes widening. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she smiled. "First day?" she asked, her voice warm with sympathy. I nodded, unable to speak. "It gets easier," she said, moving to the sink to wash her hands. "The uniforms are awful at first, but you get used to them. I'm Amara, by the way. Second-year illumination studies." "Elliot," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. "Nice to meet you, Elliot." She dried her hands, then glanced at me again, this time more carefully. Her gaze lingered on my face, and I braced for mockery, for confusion, for the inevitable "what are you?" But instead, she said, "You know, if you're worried about the ceremony, I can help. I've got some concealer in my room that might help with the, She gestured vaguely at her own jaw. I blinked. "You'd do that?" "Of course. We're all in this together, right?" She grinned. "Besides, Ashford's a nightmare for everyone the first week. Might as well help each other survive." 20 minutes later, I sat on Amara's bed while she worked on my face with the focused precision of a Renaissance painter. "Hold still," she murmured, dabbing concealer along my jawline. "This stuff is magic. My boyfriend swears by it when he gets razor burn." I didn't correct her assumption. I just sat, frozen, as she blended and smoothed, her fingers light and professional. There, she said finally, stepping back to admire her work. Much better. Now let's do something about your hair. She pulled a comb and a handful of bobby pins from her drawer and set to work, brushing my hair back from my face and pinning it into something that almost resembled a style. When she was done, she turned me toward the mirror. The difference was startling. My jawline was softened, the shadow erased. My hair, pulled back, revealed the shape of my face in a way it never had before. I still didn't look like a woman, not quite, but I no longer looked like a disaster. I looked like someone trying. Thank you, I whispered, my throat tight. Amara squeezed my shoulder. Anytime. Now come on, we've got 15 minutes before the ceremony, and trust me, you do not want to be late. The great hall was breathtaking, vaulted ceilings, stained glass windows depicting medieval scholars, long wooden tables arranged in rows. Candles flickered in iron sconces, casting dancing shadows across the stone walls. I slipped into a seat near the back, keeping my head down, hyper-aware of every glance, every whisper. But no one pointed. No one laughed. A few students nodded politely in my direction. I was invisible in the best possible way. The ceremony began with speeches from the Institute's director, a silver-haired man whose voice could have narrated the Bible, and introductions from department heads. I barely heard any of it. My mind was spinning, trying to process the surreal nightmare my life had become. And then, halfway through the director's speech about Ashford's commitment to preserving the sacred art of manuscript restoration, I saw her. Sienna. She was sitting 3 rows ahead, her dark hair cut into a sharp bob, wearing the same uniform as everyone else. But on her, it looked effortless, almost defiant. She was leaning back in her chair, arms crossed, a faint smirk on her lips. And then she turned. Our eyes met. The smirk widened into a grin, not cruel, but knowing. Triumphant. She mouthed 2 words, "You're welcome." After the ceremony, I cornered her in the courtyard, my fury barely contained. "What the hell did you do?" I hissed, grabbing her arm. She didn't flinch. Instead, she turned to face me fully, her expression maddeningly calm. "I got you into Ashford," she said simply. "You're welcome. You lied on my application. You changed my gender. Do you have any idea what you've done to me?" "Yes," she said, her voice dropping. "I gave you a chance you never would have taken yourself." I stared at her, stunned. "What are you talking about?" She sighed, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "Elliot, do you know how many men applied to the restoration program this year? 218. Do you know how many women? 43. And do you know how many spots were reserved specifically for female applicants as part of Ashford's new gender equity initiative?" My blood ran cold. 12, she continued. 12 guaranteed spots for women, no matter how competitive the pool. You were qualified, Elliot, God knows you were qualified, but you weren't exceptional enough to beat 200 other men. So I made you exceptional in a different way. I felt the ground tilt beneath me. You used a quota to get me in?" "I used a system that was already broken," she corrected. "And I made it work for you." "But I'm not," I gestured helplessly at myself, at the uniform, at the absurdity of it all. "I'm not a woman, Sienna." She tilted her head, studying me with unsettling intensity. "Aren't you?" she asked softly. The question hung in the air like smoke. "I've seen the way you look at yourself, Elliot. The way you hide. The way you shrink. You've spent your whole life trying to disappear into books because you never felt comfortable in your own skin." She stepped closer. "Maybe this is your chance to figure out why." I wanted to scream. To shove her. To demand she fix this nightmare she'd created. But instead, I just stood there, trembling, as her words burrowed under my skin. Because part of me, a small, terrified part one didn't want to acknowledge, wondered if she was right. The first week at Ashford Institute passed in a haze of humiliation and hypervigilance. Every morning, I woke before dawn to the sound of rain against the windows, my stomach already knotted with dread. The routine became a kind of torture, pulling on the tights that clung too intimately to my skin, fastening the blouse with its backward buttons, stepping into the skirt that swished with every movement like a whisper of accusation. Each piece of the uniform felt like a layer of lies I was wrapping around myself. And yet, each morning, I put it on. Because the alternative, being expelled, losing my place at Ashford, disappointing my grandmother, was worse than the daily erasure of who I thought I was. The institute itself was a cathedral of knowledge, exactly as I'd dreamed. The restoration workshop occupied the oldest wing of the main building, a vast stone chamber with arched windows and workbenches scarred by centuries of use. The smell of leather, parchment, and conservation chemicals filled the air like incense. Under any other circumstances, I would have been in heaven. But I couldn't focus. Not when every interaction felt like walking through a minefield. In class, Professor Ashvin, a rail-thin woman with wire-rimmed glasses and hands stained permanently brown from tannin, addressed me as Miss Cross without hesitation. When I flinched at the title, she simply raised an eyebrow and continued her lecture on medieval binding techniques as if nothing had happened. The other students were worse. Not cruel, exactly, but curious. Watchful. During our first practical session, learning to repair a damaged 15th century prayer book, a girl named Charlotte leaned over and whispered, "You're so tall. I wish I had your height. Must be nice not to need a step stool for the upper shelves." I mumbled something noncommittal and kept my eyes on the damaged spine in front of me. At lunch in the dining hall, another student, a cheerful redhead named Fiona, plopped down beside me and launched into an enthusiastic monologue about how brave I was for cutting my hair so short. "I could never pull off that pixie cut," she gushed. "You have such strong features. It's very Tilda Swinton." I wanted to scream that it wasn't a pixie cut, that I'd just forgotten to get a haircut before leaving for England, that I was a man, for God's sake. But the words died in my throat. Because correcting them would mean explaining. And explaining would mean losing everything. So I smiled weakly and said thank you. And hated myself a little more.